Hi everyone. In this video, I'd like to talk about healing from narcissistic abuse. We'll cover what narcissistic abuse is and we'll see what the behaviours look like from narcissistic people towards their children and their partners, and then we'll see what effects it has on those on the receiving end. When we've been in a situation where we've been abused by a narcissist, whether they're a parent or a partner, where are we starting from? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? So healing is possible. And in this video, we'll look at the steps you can take and how to get there. So let's have a look. So what is narcissistic abuse? Let's have a look at an article on my website. Narcissistic abuse describes the way narcissists behave towards intimate others and the effects it has on them. NPD is a set of defense mechanisms that shape the way people with NPD look at and relate to the world. This leads to behaviors that are abusive and destructive to the people around them. So in general, people with narcissistic personality disorder are only loyal to themselves. They have no loyalty to others, including their children and partners. They're manipulative. They will lie to bend you to their will. They're damaging of other people's reputations. So they can often run what is known as a smear campaign against their partners or children. And this means they will speak badly of their partner or children to others and can ruin their reputations. They're dishonest because they lie constantly. They're controlling. They're very controlling and will dominate their partners and children and expect things to be the way they wish them to be. This is due to both their sense of entitlement and because they are insecure. Jealousy. They can be jealous and insecure, and this leads them to be paranoid and suspicious. Unfaithful. So they'll probably have multiple affairs. They're not interested in what you think, so they have no value for your opinion. You may try to explain your point of view to them, but they will never value it or come to respect or agree with your way of thinking. They're coercive. They will mould their children and partners into being what the person with NPD thinks they should be through coercive techniques. They're cold, callous and unfeeling on the whole. Their coldness can be disconcerting and hard to believe at times. They have the ability to discard their children and long-term romantic partners. They can be very dismissive. So it can feel like they can just switch a switch in their mind and that's it, you're gone. You're ejected from their life, and if they never see you again. Superficially, they're fine with that. Maybe deep down, there's a sadness there, but this is probably something they're not very in touch with consciously. They're lacking in empathy for others. Their own needs are important to them, but they have no value for their partners or children's wants, needs, or opinions. This is because they are dissociated from their empathy. So there was a study done, which was a self-reported study, which means they filled in a questionnaire and they said what was going on for them. They gave this questionnaire to some narcissists, and I think half of them were aware that they had empathy, but it was something that they switched off. Arrogant. Their arrogance means that they will see you as inferior and they'll be dominant. They're emotionally abusive, so they can be verbally, physically, and emotionally abusive and neglectful. Their partners and children are their emotional punch bag. They may use threats, intimidation, or long periods of silent treatment, which may go on for weeks. Gaslighters. So they gaslight people, don't they? So gaslighting is an insidious form of manipulation and psychological control. Victims of gaslighting are deliberately and systematically fed false information that leads them to question what they know to be true, often about themselves. They may end up doubting their memory, their perception, and even their sanity. Gaslighters will use these techniques on romantic partners, family members, and their children. Gaslighting involves a pattern of abusive behaviours with the intent not just to influence someone, but to control them. Idealising and devaluing. They tend to think in extremes and either idealise or devalue themselves and others. In romantic relationships, people with NPD can idealise their partners at the beginning of the relationship, but this will turn into their partner being devalued later on. And often when you've had a narcissistic partner, there can be a wish and a belief that you can get back to that beginning of the relationship where everything seemed so nice and you were treated so kindly because you were being idealized, and it's unlikely that it's going to come back. It might come back briefly if the relationship ends and they want to rekindle that relationship with you, but often you'll stay in a position of being devalued. Likely to play favourites with children. When a person with NPD is a parent, there will often be one child who is idealised, the golden child, and another child or children who are devalued, the scapegoat. Only children receive a mix of idealisation and devaluing. They can coldly discard their children if their children do not obey them. And there's another category here, which is the invisible children. So this is a child in the family that's isolates themselves quite a lot and is generally ignored on the whole by the narcissistic parent. There is a lot of power play and psychological warfare in any relationship with someone with narcissistic personality disorder. So let's look into the effects that has on the people around them. The results of these behaviours are devastating and do a tremendous amount of damage. They really do. So let's look into some of the results from narcissistic abuse. So we can have complex PTSD, an overwhelming sense of guilt or shame, dissociative disorders, addictions, substance misuse, panic attacks, developing narcissistic borderline or schizoid personality disorders, a sense of the self or surroundings being unreal, chronic people-pleasing, irritability, depression, insomnia, feeling frequently emotionally overwhelmed, having nightmares or flashbacks, feelings of shame or worthlessness, eating disorders, chronic pain, feelings of not knowing who you are or what you want from life, anxiety, among many others. So there are many outcomes of growing up in a relationship like this. If you'd like to, you can look at my video, which is Why Do I Feel Unstable? And that addresses dissociative outcomes of having a narcissistic parent. So what a dissociative disorder looks like, how our defenses fragment, and then we become easily triggered into fight, flight, freeze or submissive defense responses, or trauma responses we can call them. That's another outcome that some people might find they develop. So if you have a look at that video, you can see if that's applicable to you or not. And then PTSD can be an outcome of having a relationship with a narcissist, and complex PTSD can be the outcome of having a parent with narcissistic personality disorder. So let's have a look at another article on my website. This is the International Trauma Questionnaire, which you can find on the internet, or you can have a look at this article if you'd like to. This questionnaire can give you the answer to whether you have PTSD or complex PTSD. So post-traumatic stress disorder is seen as re-experiencing in the here and now the trauma, avoidance of triggers of the trauma, a sense of current threat, so being alert for danger. If we have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, then we also have affective dysregulation. So that's what I address in my video, which is called Why Do I Feel Unstable? A negative self-concept. So this is feeling lots of guilt and shame and that we're a bad person. There's something defective or wrong with us. And also disturbances in relationships. So to look a bit more in depth at the disturbances in relationships, if you've had a narcissistic parent, you're likely to have a disorganized style of attachment. And if you'd like to have a look at my video, The Roots of Complex PTSD, Attachment and Narcissistic Parents, then that will give you some information which addresses that aspect of this picture. So let's have a look at an infographic here, which talks a little bit more about the symptoms of PTSD. So we have avoiding thinking of the trauma, avoiding talking of the trauma, being easily frightened. So having an exaggerated startle response. So we might hear a little noise or drop a teaspoon on the floor, and then we'll find ourselves going like this. Negative mood, negative thinking, always on guard, avoiding places, avoiding activities, having flashbacks. These can take the form of thoughts, emotions, or images. Finding it difficult to concentrate. being overcome with anger and being aggressive, a loss of interest in life and people and yourself, feelings of guilt or shame, substance abuse, difficulty in sleeping, and having bad dreams. So they are all symptoms of CPTSD and PTSD. So this is our starting point where we're working from when we've come from having a narcissistic family, and sometimes if we haven't come from a narcissistic family but then we've ended up in a relationship with someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. So where do we want to get to? Where's our finishing point? So James F. Masterson addresses this in his book, The Search for the Real Self, and these are a condensed version from that book. These are the 10 key capacities of the real self. So when we are living in our real self and we're not living in trauma responses or in an adapted self, which we've had to adapt to suit the environment that we were growing up in, then this is how the real self feels. The real self has capacity to experience a wide range of feelings deeply with liveliness, joy, vigour, excitement and spontaneity. A capacity to expect appropriate entitlements. 3. A capacity for self-activation and assertion. This capacity includes the ability to identify one's own unique individuality, wishes, dreams and goals, and to be assertive in expressing them autonomously. So this means that we were able to become ourselves. We bloomed into being ourselves. We asserted our own wants and needs. And that we're in touch with what our wants and needs are, what our dreams are, what our goals are in life, and we're able to assertively express them. This doesn't happen in a narcissistic family, does it? Or in a relationship with a narcissist. Acknowledgement of self-esteem. This capacity allows a person to identify and acknowledge that he has effectively coped with a problem or crisis in a positive and creative way. The ability to soothe painful feelings. The real self will not allow us to wallow in misery. When things go wrong and we are hurt, the real self devises ways to minimize and soothe painful feelings. The ability to make and stick to commitments. The real self allows us to make commitments to relationships and career goals. Despite obstacles and setbacks, a person with a strong sense of the real self will not abandon his or her goal or decision when it is clear that it is a good one and in his or her best interest. Another capacity of the real self is creativity. Based on helping people allow their real selves to emerge is the ability to replace old familiar patterns of living and problem solving with new and equally or more successful ones. Intimacy. The capacity to express the real self fully in a close relationship with another person, with minimal anxiety about abandonment or engulfment. So engulfment means that feeling of being emotionally suffocated. It enables us to manage ourselves and our feelings on our own through periods when there is no special person in our lives, and not confuse this type of aloneness with the psychic aloneness springing from an impaired real self that drives us to despair, or the pathological need to fill up our lives with meaningless relationships or dead-end relationships just to avoid coming face to face with the impaired real self. And number 10, continuity of self. This is the capacity to recognize and acknowledge that we each have a core that persists through space and time. So this references what is reality for many people is that instability, that feeling of fragmentation, that feeling of I need to keep myself together, I could fall apart. So when we move into the real self, then we have that solid core. We feel reliant on ourselves, we know who we are, we're more confident, we're at peace in our own skin, and we don't have that sense that we're going to fall apart because we feel much more together. So this is where we ideally want to be. The path to healing is unique to everyone, but it follows a blueprint in general that I'll share with you now. But you don't have to do all of the parts of it. You can find your own way to move through that best suits you. So let's have a look at an article on my website. This article is called Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. My website is childrenofnarcissists.org.uk. Healing takes place through knowledge. So read everything you can about psychological subjects like narcissistic personality disorder, complex PTSD, codependency, self-sabotaging, addictions, anything which is relevant to you. So the more you know about it, the more that you'll be able to understand yourself. So learning leads to understanding. You will develop an understanding of yourself and things will start to make sense. So you'll start to understand yourself and it will all make sense. You'll think, no wonder I drank every day. Or no wonder I self-sabotaged all the time. Or no wonder I always felt anxiety. Or no wonder I always had a big sense of shame about everything that I did. And that understanding of yourself will lead to acceptance of yourself. This means you will stop judging yourself so harshly and your self-worth will increase, which leads to self-compassion. You'll develop compassion towards yourself and move away from a place of disliking yourself or blaming yourself for everything, taking responsibility for everything, thinking that if you'd been different, life would have been different. This isn't applicable in the case of narcissistic people. And developing that self-compassion leads to self-awareness. So the fear of looking within yourself will disappear. And with self-awareness comes the ability to recognize patterns in your behaviour, which leads to change. You will then have the knowledge and ability to change your life. So this sounds very simplistic, doesn't it? But in a nutshell, this is what we're doing when we're doing self-development. And we look at ourselves and we look at our demons and we look at our pain that we've been avoiding for all these years. We stand and we face those things. And in a nutshell, then this leads us into a happier place. So to go into it in a bit more depth, knowledge and understanding. So in pursuit of healing, understanding NPD can be liberating as children of narcissists and people who've had relationships with narcissists realise that the treatment they received was impersonal because the narcissist cannot see their child or partner as a person. The narcissist can only see their own needs. So then this starts to change your relationship with yourself. So instead of seeing yourself as the cause of the narcissistic behaviours, you weren't. It was kind of nothing to do with you. It wouldn't have mattered what you did or didn't do. You would have still suffered the same fate. Knowledge leads to self-acceptance. Self-compassion. Children of narcissists will often have little self-compassion. Self-compassion can be learnt and practiced, and it is about treating yourself in the way you would treat a good friend. Dr. Kristin Neff has YouTube videos and a website on self-compassion, which is really interesting if you'd like to take a look at that. And change is also possible through neuroplasticity. So even into old age, our brains are changing all the time according to new things that we're learning. It prunes the parts of our brain that we no longer use, maybe old coping mechanisms we don't use anymore. It can prune those things. But neuroplasticity shows us that change is possible. So as we do change the way that we think, our brain structure changes. And this gives great hope that we're not stuck, are we, in patterns of thinking. We can break our way out. We change our brains through a combination of processing the suppressed emotional pain and becoming more mindful, self-aware and compassionate towards ourselves. Self-awareness. If you'd like to have a look at my video, which is triggers and how they work, this can be helpful in coming to understand yourself as well. So generally, when we've come from a difficult background or a traumatic background, we're often triggered into fight, flight, freeze or submit defenses or trauma responses, we can call them. And developing self-awareness and awareness of these triggers and what our triggered responses feel like can help us to move out of them. So the more self-awareness that we have, the more we're bringing things into our conscious awareness. And we do this by developing awareness of our triggers, developing awareness of our triggered responses, and this keeps our prefrontal lobes online. So this is our logic and reasoning brain, which switches off when we're in a trauma response or when we're in a defensive response. So the more self-awareness we develop, looking at ourselves in a non-judgmental, curious way, thinking, what's this triggered response I'm in? Why am I feeling so angry now, for example? And what could have triggered that anger? What's just happened, or what happened an hour ago? Because sometimes we can have delayed responses to things. So it's really interesting. Many children of narcissists will have some self-awareness, but much of their emotional life will be repressed. Knowledge of NPD and understanding of this leads to acceptance of the self, and this opens up self-awareness. They can kind of happen concurrently, or self-awareness comes first and then we accept ourselves afterwards. And all of these things actually don't happen in a list. They develop alongside each other. But just for simplicity's sake, I listed them. The development of self-awareness slowly brings the suppressed feelings and thoughts into conscious awareness. Self-awareness combined with self-acceptance gives individuals the ability to change their behaviours. The unconscious needs to be made conscious so that it is no longer an influence that seems at times to be beyond our control. Gaining awareness of the inner self makes change possible. Self-awareness can be developed just by noticing our feelings in an inquisitive and non-judgmental way. As I've just mentioned, sometimes it can be obvious what the triggers are, sometimes it's not immediately apparent. Inquisitiveness helps to develop new neurons in the prefrontal cortex area of the brain, which is responsible for reasoning and logic. Changes then happen through neuroplasticity. When we are triggered, defense mechanisms in other parts of the brain which do not have rational logical thinking skills have taken over in an attempt to protect. There are constant triggers in the environment which can evoke strong and sometimes extreme emotions and reactions. And also there can be internal triggers as well. So it's important to try not to berate yourself for anything that you are feeling. So when we're developing self-awareness, we want to just notice what we're feeling so we can get a picture of who we are. So this is like putting together a puzzle. So lots of the pieces are in our subconscious, some of the pieces are in our consciousness, and we want to bring all those pieces into our consciousness so we can get a picture of who we are. And then this is healing, isn't it? When we can see that full picture. Developing our self-awareness helps to keep our prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning center of the brain, online, as opposed to the mammalian, reptilian parts of our brains being in charge, so that the habitual thought patterns can be disrupted and healing can take place. Healing cannot take place without the development of self-awareness. So we have these thought patterns, these cycles of our behaviour, and we want to interrupt them with our self-awareness as we become conscious of what we're doing. Basically, the software of the brain is being updated through knowledge and understanding, mindfulness, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-awareness. So mindfulness techniques apply here because what we want to do is ground ourselves in the here and now. So often if we're in a defense response, we're in a trauma response, what mindfulness can do is bring us out of that trauma response into the here and now with practice and over time. So this isn't something that happens immediately. Some people don't do these techniques, so they're known as grounding techniques, and they can still get to healing because for some people it feels unsafe. So it's choosing what's right for you and what's comfortable for you. So we don't want to work against your defenses. So if your defenses tell you, do not do mindfulness, what a load of rubbish, defenses can talk to us in different ways, can't they? Sometimes we can feel fear. Sometimes we dismiss things. Sometimes we think things are a load of rubbish. But then 6 months later, we might think, oh, actually, that wasn't a load of rubbish. That was maybe right in some way. So mindfulness techniques, grounding techniques help to bring us back into the here and now. Mindfulness as well is about getting to know yourself. Children of narcissists and people who've had partners that are narcissistic often think that their symptoms of trauma are their character, such as an addiction, people-pleasing or irritability. So people think, oh, that's just me, don't they? But actually it's not, because that thing will change when you've healed and when you've recovered. So these things are actually coping mechanisms which fade with healing. It helps to get back in touch with the body and emotions and develop self-awareness. And it's the opposite of the dissociation that has often taken place for someone with trauma. So we're reversing what happened in early childhood, or reversing what happened in that relationship with that narcissist you may have had as an adult. So we want to reintegrate parts of ourselves that may have become fragmented. Grounding techniques which calm the nervous system are really important for people who have complex PTSD or PTSD. So these are things like deep breathing exercises. So there's one which I like a lot, which is called the 4-7-8 technique. So we breathe in for the count of 4, we hold it for the count of 7, and we breathe out for the count of 8. So this doesn't need to be done in seconds, and it needs to be comfortable for us and not painful in any way or distressing in any way. There are lots of variations of this. There's the 4-6-4 and other numbers. And then we can do 1 or 2 of these, and that can sometimes be enough to calm everything down. If we're triggered into fight, flight, freeze or submit, these techniques can help to tell the nervous system there's no danger. So a long deep breath tells the nervous system we're okay and we can calm down. For some people it might not work in the beginning, but it might after some time. And it's good to practice these things when we're not feeling stressed as well. Because of that neuroplasticity, then we're developing new neural pathways in our brain, aren't we? And then we're more likely to think of it down the road as a response, rather than we go into a defense response. We're in fight, flight, freeze or submit. We can't think clearly. And it's not until we calm down later that we can think, oh, I maybe could have tried to do a breathing technique or something to calm myself down. So it can take a while for this to become part of our thought patterns, and something that we do think of when we're triggered, in a triggered response. So there are 3 types of grounding techniques. There are physical ones, so we can do things like clench our fists, push our feet into the floor, or be mindful of the chair that we're sitting on, something like that. Others are self-soothing, so these will work if you have a bit of self-compassion, and probably not if you don't have a lot at the moment. But soothing yourself, saying it will be okay, things will be fine, things will be all right, that kind of thing. And then we have mental techniques that some people like. So there can be techniques about thinking, what can you see? So you can look around the room that you're in and think of all the square objects or all the blue objects. Where did you buy it from? Was it a gift from someone? What's it made from? How long have you had it? Focusing the mind on things like that. Focusing the mind on changing your thoughts. So physical techniques through the body that bring you back into the here and now. Soothing techniques which can soothe the brain and calm down our defense responses that way. Or mental techniques that can help to distract us and can calm the body down that way. So it's choosing which one works best for you. There are lots of grounding techniques you can look up on the internet. There are hundreds of them actually. And some of them work better for bringing yourself from feeling quite flat or depressed up into feeling more comfortable. And then there are another set of techniques, and there's some overlap. There are another set of techniques that will bring you from feeling anxious down into feeling more comfortable as well. So what works for you and what technique is good to bring you up or down, depending on where you are in terms of your nervous system, if you're hyper aroused or hyper aroused. And as part of that learning and knowledge, there's a book you might like to have a look at, which is by Lindsay C. Gibson, and it's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting or Self-Involved Parents. This is a really interesting book that's easy to read, which can help you to understand the effects that your parents had on you. And counselling or therapy with someone that understands trauma can be really helpful here, especially if they understand how dissociation works, because as a rule, most people that have had a narcissistic parent or a long-term relationship with a narcissistic partner will find themselves being somewhat dissociative. And again, if you have a look at my video, Why Do I Feel Unstable?, I explain that more there. And therapy can help us to process the underlying repressed feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, anger, rage, grief, confusion, self-blame, the fear of abandonment, the fear of being ourselves, all the things that I talked about in the beginning of this video can be processed with a counsellor, and this can really help us to heal. So healing is essentially, it's moving things from our unconscious into our consciousness. So then we're more in control and we can change things. It's moving from being unstable to being very stable, from having unstable foundations that we build ourselves on to having a stable foundation. It's moving from lies to truth, isn't it? So when we grow up in a narcissistic household, or when we're in a relationship with a narcissist, it's all lies, manipulations, nothing's true, there's lots of subtext. We're often trying to work out what is true and what's not true. There can be a lot of confusion for someone that's come from that situation. And we want to move to a place of truth, don't we? So we have a strong perception of reality. We know what's true, we know what's not true. We no longer are in those defenses of denial or minimizing what our experience was. And we've come to accept it for what it was, for how abusive it was. And we want to move away from the delusion and the lies into truth, the solidity of truth and the stableness of truth. And we can look at it as moving from darkness to light as well. So all those things hidden in the darkness of our subconscious, we're bringing those to light, the light of our conscious attention, aren't we? So this is all healing, isn't it? So we're living in light, we're living in truth. And that metaphor of darkness to light is interesting as well, because so many people feel weighed down, don't they, by what they feel is a burden. So those emotions can feel so heavy and dark, can't they? That fear of abandonment. Living in fear in general is what it is to have a narcissistic parent or a narcissistic partner, because a lot of our behaviours, thoughts, responses are based in fear. So fear and all those things connected to it are quite heavy and dense, aren't they? And many people talk about when they've done healing and they're coming out of the other side, they talk about feeling lighter, much lighter, feeling more together, feeling more like themselves. But it's interesting that people feel lighter because then they've processed this dark stuff inside them and it's out, it's gone, they're not carrying it anymore. So we're moving from unconscious to conscious, from instability to stability, from lies into truth, and from darkness into light. And that's essentially what we're doing as we are healing. And we're facing those fears and we're facing our inner demons, aren't we? So we feel like they're a demon. They're a part of ourselves that we don't like, that we're running from, that we're hiding from. So we want to stand and face our fears, face the things we're scared of, face the parts of ourselves we don't like or that we're also scared of, and move away from that fear into a place of peace. So when we're in that place where we have PTSD or complex PTSD or a panic disorder, or we often feel emotionally overwhelmed, all the symptoms of PTSD I talked about earlier, and CPTSD, then it can feel quite overwhelming because it can feel like it's a massive mountain to climb to heal from this. But it can be done. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So we're slowly making progress towards that healing. And it's not easy. This is true. Facing that stuff inside us that we want to run away from is not easy. But then neither is staying where we are, is it? In that pain or in that denial. Trying to manage our inner world, trying to manage our exterior world as well. Avoiding things, hiding away at home maybe. All the things that we do when we're trying to cope. Being in that place isn't pleasant. Facing our demons isn't pleasant either. But when we do face our demons, when we do face the pain and come through the pain, then we're in a much lighter place, more light, stable, living in a place of truth, comfortable in our own skin, happy to be ourselves and not feeling shame and guilt and all the other heavy, dark emotions that come with having a narcissistic parent or having a relationship with someone who's narcissistic. And the other thing that's important to mention is when we do move into our real self, then we move into a place where we can fulfill our real potential and our full potential. So we know who we are, we know what we want, we know what goals we want to reach, and we have the energy and the resources to get there as well. Because our energy is no longer absorbed by being in these defense responses, and it's no longer absorbed by the trauma. So it frees up all that energy. So when you heal, you might feel so full of energy that you can't believe how full of energy that you feel, especially if you've been someone who's been very depressed and felt quite numb and flat, because that's been your coping mechanisms all these years. But you can get to a place where you're fulfilling your potential and so happy in your own skin and feeling content. You can get there. You really can get there, and healing is possible. So I hope this video was useful for you and it was interesting. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section. Take care of yourselves and goodbye. Bye.